was president of the Society of Catholic Scientists and Professor Emeritus of Theoretical Particle Physics. Can any of you find that? At the University of Delaware. He was elected a Fellow of the American Physical Society for his contributions to the cosmology of the early universe and theories of the unification of fundamental forces. He writes and lectures extensively on the relation of science and religion. He is the author of Modern Physics and Ancient Faith and The Believing Scientist. He was elected in 2010 to the Academy of Catholic Theology and was awarded the Benemeriti Medal by Pope Benedict. So let's welcome Dr. Barr.
So first, make sure you can hear me okay. So am I loud enough?
Yeah.
Oh, good. So thanks for coming out to hear me. My name is Steve Barr, as you've heard. I'm a retired professor of theoretical physics, and as was just said, I'm the president of the Society of Catholic Scientists. Let me pull this even closer. Catholic Scientists, a group which started in 2016 and has now grown to 2,600 members worldwide, though about 3/4 of our members are in the U.S. I strongly recommend, urge you to visit our website, and you can find it very easily. If you were to Google Catholic and Scientist or Catholic and Science, it probably would be the first thing that comes up. We have a lot of very good material on the website, educational material, some of which I'll mention later in the talk. The Catholic writer George Weigel was nice enough to say that our website is a treasure trove of fascinating materials. There's a lot there that students, high school students, college students, and people generally would benefit from. Okay, that said, first let me ask, how many people recognize the priest who's standing with Albert Einstein? Raise your hand. Okay, not many hands went up. Good, that means you will learn at least one thing. Now, some people say that science and religion are incompatible, and that you have to choose between God and science. You can't believe in both. To those of us who are Catholic scientists, and as I said, there are many of us, actually a lot more than belong to our society, this is a strange claim. Far from seeing religion and science as being in conflict, we feel them to be profoundly in harmony. And in fact, some of the same things that make us Catholics led us to do science in the first place. A sense of wonder, first of all. A passionate desire to know the truth and the reason behind things. And a deep conviction that everything holds together in some coherent way. For us, both the Catholic faith and science are ways of making sense of the world. Science tells us about the things that we can observe and measure, but our faith tells us much more. It has a much wider scope. It answers deeper questions. Questions about the ultimate cause of the world, of its existence, and of its orderliness. The purpose of human life and our ultimate destiny. It tells us about God and man, love and truth, sin and redemption, good and evil. The Catholic faith and empirical science are two ways of looking at reality, two perspectives, and they see things in different ways, but not in conflicting ways. Now, I've been a scientist for 47 years and a Catholic for 71 years, and I know of no scientific fact that conflicts with any Catholic doctrine. So why then do so many people seem to think that there is a conflict between science and religion? Well, one reason is that some people lump all religion together. So every example of some crazy religious idea, or some superstitious belief, or magical practice that they hear about, is evidence to them of the irrationality of all religion. Of course, that makes no sense. There are crazy political ideas. Doesn't mean all political ideas are crazy. There are crazy ideas on all sorts of subjects. It's kind of silly to dismiss all of religion just because some of it is strange. Now, another reason is that many people fail to distinguish between science itself and a certain philosophy that's often called scientific materialism. Now, in philosophy, the idea of materialism is the proposition that the only reality is matter. Ultimately, the only thing that exists is matter. And scientific materialism is the idea that somehow modern science implies that materialism is true. This is an opinion that is held by many scientists and by many people who claim to speak in the name of science, but not by any means, but is it held by all scientists, and probably not even by most of them. In any event, it has no claim to being science. It's a philosophical opinion. Now, in fact, the great antagonist of religion in our time is not atheism, it's really materialism. If matter were the only reality, as the materialists say, then of course God could not exist, because God is not a material being, he is not a material entity. But nor would the human spiritual soul exist. A human being, if materialism is true, would be nothing more than a complex arrangement or structure made of atoms. And everything about us would be ultimately explicable in terms of the laws of physics that govern how those atoms move and behave. In other words, scientific materialism implies not only that God does not exist, it's far more radical than that. It says, strictly speaking, that you don't exist either. The popular astronomer and science writer Carl Sagan, he was kind of the Neil deGrasse Tyson of the previous generation, but a much better scientist, I should say. Carl Sagan put it this way in one of his books: I am a collection of water, calcium, and organic molecules called Carl Sagan. Francis Crick, who won the Nobel Prize in medicine as the co-discoverer of the structure of DNA, wrote in one of his books, your joys and your sorrows, your memories and your ambitions, your sense of personal identity and free will are, in fact, no more than the behavior of a vast assembly of nerve cells and their associated molecules. As Lewis Carroll's Alice might have phrased it, you're nothing but a pack of neurons. So, some of the idea that religion and science are incompatible comes from intellectual prejudice. Prejudice against religion and prejudice in favor of materialism. But people who say religion and science are incompatible are also base their position on arguments. What kind of arguments? Well, there are basically three kinds of arguments. Mostly three kinds of arguments. One is philosophical. It says that religion and science, apart from anything that religion has actually discovered, science and religion just have completely contrary outlooks on the world. Science is based on reason and evidence, while religion supposedly is not. Science gives us natural explanations of things, while religion invokes God and supernatural explanations. The second kind of argument is historical. The claim is that historically, science and religion have been always at war, that religious people and its religious institutions have opposed science and tried to hold it back. And then on the other side, scientists have generally, they say, been opposed to religion. This thesis is called by historians of science the warfare thesis, or the conflict thesis. And the third type of argument is based on the actual discoveries of science, which atheists and materialists claim have debunked or disproved much of what religion has taught us about the world, about ourselves, about human beings, and about our place in the world. So let's begin. I'm going to go through these three types, one after the other. So we're going to begin with the philosophical arguments. And let's start in particular with the supposed opposition between the naturalism of science and the supernaturalism of biblical religion. Now, Christianity and Judaism were never based on supernaturalism, if you mean by that a rejection of the idea that there is a natural order. In fact, scholars tell us that the book of Genesis was in part an attack on the supernaturalism and superstition of ancient pagan religion. When Genesis said that the sun and moon were merely lamps or lights placed by God in the heavens to light the day and the night, it was attacking the paganism that worshiped the sun and moon as gods. When Genesis said that man is made in the image of God and is to exercise dominion over created things, it was, among other things, attacking the paganism in which human beings worshiped and bowed down to created things and worshiped them, or to gods made in the image of created things. In paganism, of the ancient Near East, Egypt, Rome, Greece, and so on, in paganism, the world was filled with occult forces and populated by numerous deities, gods and goddesses of the oceans and the forests, of wind and fire and lightning and sex and fertility, and on and on. Jews and Christians, however, taught that there is just one God who is not to be sought within nature, within its phenomena and forces, but outside of nature, beyond nature, a God who is indeed the author of nature. In this way, biblical religion helped strip the physical universe of divinity and made it into a natural world, no longer the abode of gods, but the creation of the one God. And since God is good, the natural world was seen as something good and worth studying. And since God is intelligent and wise, the world he made must reflect this. It must therefore have been made according to principles and laws that can be discovered and understood by reason. Biblical religion then taught that there is a natural order which comes from God, and what characterizes the natural order and reflects the rationality of God, its creator, is precisely that it is orderly, lawful, harmonious, and beautiful. Consider this passage from the letter of St. Clement of Rome to the church in Corinth, written about 97 AD. St. Clement was a bishop of Rome and listed in ancient documents as the third after St. Peter, so he was the fourth pope. So about the year 97, he wrote a famous, very long letter, and this is a small excerpt. The heavens, as they revolve beneath his government, God's, do so in quiet submission to him. The day and the night run the course he has laid down for them. Sun, moon, and the starry choirs roll on in harmony at his command, none swerving from its appointed orbit. Laws of the same kind sustain the fathomless deeps of the abyss and the untold regions of the netherworld. The impassable ocean and all the worlds that lie beyond it are themselves ruled by the like ordinances of the Lord. Upon all of these, the great architect and Lord of the the universe has enjoined peace and harmony. So God has laws and ordinances that govern this world that he created. Or consider this passage from the Latin Christian apologist, Minucius Felix, writing around the year 200 AD. So he wrote a book addressed to his pagan contemporaries. I guess I didn't let you read that, right? His pagan contemporaries to convince them of the existence of a creator. And he said to them, if upon entering some home, you saw that everything there was well tended, neat, and decorative, you would believe that some master was in charge of it, and that he was himself much superior to those good things. So too, in the home of this world, when you see providence, order, and law in the heavens and on earth, believe that there is a Lord and author of the universe, more beautiful than the stars themselves in the various parts of the whole world. Look at what these two texts I read from point to as evidence of God. Not to supernatural phenomena or miraculous departures from the order of nature, but to the order of nature itself and its lawfulness. The ancient argument, and you find this in all of the early church fathers and theologians, was that, first of all, because the universe exists, there must be a source of being, a giver of being. And second, because the universe is orderly, there must be what St. Irenaeus called a giver of order. All church fathers would say this. The order and lawfulness of nature point to a giver of order, a lawgiver. If there is a law, the ancient argument was, there is a lawgiver. So God is not only the lawgiver to Israel, but to the cosmos itself. God says in Jeremiah 33:25, when I have no covenant with day and night and have given no laws to heaven and earth, then too will I reject the descendants of Jacob and of my servant David. Psalm 148 tells of God establishing the sun, the moon, the stars, and the heavens by a decree. A decree that will not pass away. The idea of God as a rational lawgiver helped give birth to the very idea that there are laws of nature. And the idea that there are mathematical laws of physics in particular stems from Descartes and Newton in the 17th century. And both of them clearly believed and said that these laws of physics, these mathematical laws, were imposed upon matter, upon the universe by God. They're God's laws. So even some atheists concede the religious origin of the idea of physical laws. For example, the eminent biologist Edward O. Wilson of Harvard, who died several years ago, was very clearly not religious. He said he was agnostic, but I think he was really atheist. Suggested this in his book Concilians as the reason that other great civilizations, and particularly he was talking about Chinese civilization, for all of its impressive scientific achievements, did not produce a Newton or a Descartes, or the idea of universal laws. He said, why no Descartes or Newton? Because Chinese scholars had abandoned the idea of a supreme being with personal and creative properties. No rational author of nature existed for them. Consequently, the objects they meticulously described did not follow universal principles. In the absence of a compelling need for the notion of general laws, thoughts in the mind of God, so to speak, little or no search was made for them. Now, this is an atheist thing. Now, our faith, of course, does teach us that there are supernatural realities. Nature is not all that there is. One supernatural reality is grace, which has actual effects in the world. So the supernatural realities can affect the nature and what's going on in the universe. But the word supernatural which means above the natural, would make no sense unless there were a natural order in the first place. It presupposes that there's a natural order. And the concept of miracles, which are extraordinary events that go beyond what is naturally possible, presupposes that there is a natural order that determines what is naturally possible and what isn't. Otherwise, you couldn't recognize a miracle as a miracle. This is something the Catholic theologians have always said. Miracles have to be recognizable. And one reason they're recognizable is that you know about the natural order and see that this thing cannot happen naturally. And they have to be recognizable because they're signs. Scripture calls them signs and wonders. Now, there's no logical contradiction between the idea of miracles and the idea of a lawful universe. For the same lawgiver who established the laws of nature and can also suspend them or override them and make exceptions to them for some sufficiently important purpose, which always in biblical religion is the salvation of souls. As we shall see, the men who led the development of modern science in its first few centuries, the pioneers in uncovering nature's laws, such as Isaac Newton, were almost all devout Christians who believed in miracles. Now, there's a lot of confusion today, even among religious believers, about how nature relates to God. Instead of seeing God as the author of nature, they see God and nature as somehow opposed or in competition with each other. So that if something has a natural explanation, well, that means God has nothing to do with it. And if God is the cause of something, well, that means it's supernatural. And so because they think in this way, they look for evidence of God only in things that are beyond the natural or cannot be explained in natural explanations. In other words, in the gaps in our scientific understanding of the world. Hence the name God the gaps. God is hiding in the gaps in our scientific understanding. And atheists believe that as we close those gaps in our understanding of the natural world, God will be left with nowhere to hide. Now, this whole way of looking at things is utterly contrary to the traditional Christian view. If God, as the creator of the natural world, established its laws and gave things their natural powers, then his existence should be evident in nature itself and its ordinary processes, not just in miracles. This is the message of the following passage from the Book of Wisdom, 13th chapter, which is one of the latest books of the Old Testament, written about 50 BC. It's actually the only passage, actually I should have quoted a few more verses because they're very interesting. This and the next 4 verses, it's Wisdom 13, verses 1 to 9, are really the only passage in Scripture that's kind of directly addressed about scientists and science. What he was thinking of was the scientists and philosophers of ancient Greece. And he was criticizing them for not recognizing the existence of a creator. And he said, for all people who were ignorant of God were foolish by nature, and they were unable from the good things that are seen to know the one who exists. Nor did they recognize the artisan while paying heed to his works. But they supposed that either fire or wind or swift air or the circle of the stars or turbulent water or the lights in the heavens were the gods that rule the world. If we delight in the beauty of these things, people assume them to be gods. Let them know how much better than these is their Lord, for the author of beauty created them. And if people were amazed at their power and working, let them perceive from them how much more powerful is the one who formed them. For from the greatness and beauty of created things comes a corresponding perception of their Creator. And he goes on to say, and I wish I left it on the slide, he goes on to sort of excuse these scientists. He said, they're seeking the truth without knowing it. Right? In searching, he says, in searching in nature, they are unconsciously, he didn't say that, but they are without knowing it, searching for God. But they don't find him because they're so absorbed in the beauty of what they're studying that they can't look beyond what they're studying to the author of it. And he says, so perhaps they're not to be blamed. And I think that is psychologically actually the root of a lot of scientific atheism, is people who are so absorbed in nature and what they're studying and understanding it that they somehow can't look beyond it. But I digress, because I wanted to quote this passage really here to show what is it that he's pointing to as evidence of a creator. It's to perfectly natural phenomena. Fire, wind, swift air, the circle of the stars, meaning the orbits of the stars, apparent orbits of the stars, turbulent water, and the lights in the heavens. Now, medieval theologians distinguished two ways in which God acts in the world. He can act directly in a supernatural way, for example, turning water into wine. Or he can accomplish his will through natural processes and natural causes, which in the terminology of theology are called secondary causes. It has always been the Christian view that God ordinarily acts in this world, in the latter way, through the natural, and in extraordinary cases can act directly in a miraculous and supernatural way. In the words of the late scholastic theologian, the famous scholastic theologian Francisco Suarez, God does not interfere directly with the natural order, whereas secondary, that is, natural causes, suffice to produce the intended effect. Now, this principle, which was believed long before Suarez, this principle was important for the founding of science because it implied that when confronted by some new and puzzling event or phenomenon, we shouldn't immediately chalk it up to a miracle. We should look first for natural explanations. We should look for the natural explanations of strange things. And superstitious people, he felt, tend to see the supernatural in every unusual or strange event. But this was criticized by medieval thinkers. For example, the great, actually brilliant scientist, Nicholas Oresme, who was also a bishop in the 14th century. In explaining the marvels of nature, Oresme said, quote, there is no reason to take recourse to the heavens, or to demons, or to our glorious God, as if he would produce these effects directly, any more than he directly produces those effects whose natural causes we believe are well known to us. And another great medieval scientist, Jean Bourdon, wrote, the philosophers, and that in those days meant scientists too, scientists in those days were called natural philosophers. The philosophers explained such marvels by appropriate natural causes, but common folk, not knowing the causes, believe these phenomena are produced by a miracle of God, which is usually not true. In other words, we should first seek appropriate natural causes rather than jumping to the conclusion that something is a miracle. That's why the Catholic Church, in its canonization procedures, does not declare a miracle worthy of belief until it has first excluded the likelihood of natural explanations. Now, this brings us back to the very crucial theological distinction between primary and secondary causality. Primary cause and secondary cause. And I think the failure to understand this distinction really is at the heart of one of the main reasons that a lot of people think there's a conflict between science and religion. Now, I'd like to explain this distinction using an analogy, the analogy of an author of a novel or play. God is to the universe in some way as the author of a novel or play is to the novel or play. In fact, this is a very ancient analogy. The early Christians often said that books, the book of the scriptures and the book of the universe, the book of nature. So let's think of a particular book. Hamlet, the play Hamlet. And I remember reading that in high school, and I remember that in Hamlet, the character Hamlet murders the character Polonius, who's eavesdropping behind a curtain, and Hamlet draws a dagger and stabs Polonius through the curtain and kills him. So we're going to have a little election here. We're going to vote on what is the cause of Polonius' death. So I'm going to give you two causes, and raise your hand if you think it's the cause of Polonius' death. So first, did Polonius die because a character Hamlet stabbed him through a curtain? Raise your hand if you think so. So most of you think I was lying to you when I told you that that's what happened. Okay. Now, how many of you think that Polonius died, on the other hand, because Shakespeare wrote the play that way? Right? You see, it's a trick question. To quote my cousin Vinny, it's a trick question. Because they're both correct. They're both 100% the cause of Polonius dying. Hamlet stabbing through the curtain is 100% the cause of Polonius dying. And Shakespeare writing the play that way is 100%. They're not in competition. They're not rival explanations. They don't compete with each other. They're both true. The cause within the plot of the play, what I would like to call the horizontal cause, within the plot is Hamlet stabbing Polonius. But the vertical cause of the whole play and everything that happens in it is Shakespeare. He's the reason there's a play at all. He's the reason for all the characters and events in the play. He's the reason for all the relationships among those characters and events within the play. He's the reason, Shakespeare, why Hamlet stabbed Polonius and why Polonius and why Polonius died. So, now, the analogy, of course, is that there are causes within the universe's plot, which all of us study every day. We're always looking for the reason why things happen. There's smoke, there must be fire. Everybody, every day, is looking into the natural causes within the plot of the universe of why things happen. But God, as the author of nature, as author of the universe, is the cause of the whole plot. And so everything is attributed to God as the creator. And that's why it's silly. This also makes clear why it's silly to treat evolution and creation as alternatives. Did this particular creature, this hippopotamus or giraffe or crocodile, did it arise through a sequence of natural causes like sexual reproduction, like evolution? Did the biologists tell us about it? Yes. But did it also arise because God wrote it into the script of the universe? Yes. So they're both causes. They're not in competition. You don't have to choose between them. That's the Catholic view. The atheists, of course, and fundamentalists don't see this. It's either one or the other for them. Okay, now this also makes clear, this analogy, why scientific materialists are wrong to think that we believe without evidence in God. For materialists, the evidence for some, they only believe in matter, so the evidence of some material thing existing, there are two ways to have such evidence. One, you can see, when you can sense the thing. You can know that it exists by sensation. Or, you can know that it exists as the natural cause of something that you observe. So, for example, if I have a compass, I can directly see, or I can see that it exists. I hold it in my hands. Now, I can't sense a magnetic field, but I infer that there is this thing, a magnetic field, that is the natural cause of the compass needle moving, which I can see. So I either sense it or I infer it to exist as a natural cause of what I see. Now, God cannot be known in either of these two ways because he's not a part of the physical universe. He's not a part of nature who could be sensed. Nor is God a natural cause within the universe. He's not like electricity or dynamite or something, a physical cause. God is not a cause within nature. God is the cause of nature. And so the evidence for God is of a different kind. Nature gives evidence of God in the same way that a play or novel gives evidence of its author, even if the author doesn't appear in the plot of the novel or play. The very existence of the novel or play testifies to a novelist or a playwright. In the same way also that a musical composition testifies to the existence of a composer, even though you will not see the composer among the notes. Okay, so now that's all I'm going to say about philosophy. Let's, in the remaining time, let's talk about history. Remember okay, this is the point I just made. Of course, we know the author of the universe did make an appearance in the plot, but that's something special. In the incarnation. So let's turn to history. War, religion, and science, have they historically been in war? This is the so-called conflict thesis. There was a time when even most historians of science believed this. It was the standard narrative. But today, if you talk to historians of science, real historians of science, they will tell you, unanimously tell you, that the conflict thesis is just plain wrong. It's flat wrong. It is, in fact, a false narrative and a myth. Now, the sources of the myth are slightly complicated, but basically it was due to a lot of propaganda that started in the 19th century, especially strongly in the late 19th century. And the reasons for this propaganda were, I won't go into. Well, I will say this. In Catholic countries, it was because of the people who thought the church was too powerful and were trying to cut the Catholic Church down to size, so it was from anti-clericals. In Protestant countries, it was largely based on anti-Catholicism. But there was this widespread propaganda, and two of the most effective pieces of propaganda came from these two cheerful-looking gentlemen. In 1874, John William Draper, on the left, wrote a book called History of the Conflict Between Religion and Science. And in 1896, Andrew Dixon White, who actually borrowed a lot of stuff from Draper's book, wrote one called The History of the Conflict of Science with Theology in Christendom. Andrew Dixon White was the first president of Cornell University, as it happens. These books, in modern terms, went viral. They were enormous bestsellers. They had never gone out of print. They were translated into many languages. And they helped to shape, to create the myth of a warfare thesis. The fact that if you go out and talk to an ordinary person, they will tell you, almost certainly, that science and religion have historically been at war. The fact that if you go and talk to a college professor, and they will tell you the same thing, is largely due to the influence of these two men in their books, and to similar propaganda. But it's all nonsense. So these books are now regarded by real historians as almost completely worthless. They're filled with mistakes, distortions, and things that were frankly made up. If I had more time, I would tell you some amusing things that were made up. Now, the idea that there were two groups of people, that there was the religious camp and the science camp that were at war with each other, can be shown to be false very simply. You don't have to be a historian to know this. And the way to see that this is nonsense is that for most of the history of science, the scientists and the religious people were not two hostile camps, because almost all the scientists were themselves religious. Modern science is the result of what is often called the scientific revolution, which is sparked, generally people say it was sparked by Nicholas Copernicus in the 1500s, but it really got going full steam in the 1600s, which is usually thought of as the century of the scientific revolution. Now let's look at the scientists of that founding era. Here are the top 21. I think if anybody made a list of the top 20, 21, they're going to come up with almost exactly this list. These are the great figures, and are the greatest ones, but I give pictures. So, going from left to right, Copernicus was himself an official of the Catholic Church. He is a canon of Hamburg Cathedral. Johannes Kepler, who discovered the laws of planetary motion that are named after him, was a devout Lutheran whose scientific works, I actually took one out of the library, his scientific treatises are half composed of prayers and meditations, and the other half science. And this is a prayer from one of his great works. I thank you, Lord God, our Creator, that you have allowed me to see the beauty in your work of creation. That perfectly summarizes the attitude of scientists, of all of these scientists. They didn't see their work as undermining religion, but as revealing the hidden beauty of God's creation. Galileo remained a practicing, believing Catholic till the day he died. Apparently, when he was very old and couldn't walk very well, he had himself carried to Mass. René Descartes, a great philosopher, was also was also a great mathematician and great scientist. He invented the use of coordinates, Cartesian coordinates. He invented the use of coordinates, and as a philosopher, he argued the existence of God and the human soul, and he declared himself a believing Catholic. Blaise Pascal was a genius in mathematics and physics, but he was also a devout Catholic whose life was transformed by a mystical experience he had, and who spent the rest of his life writing in defense of religious belief and against religious skepticism. He died quite young. Robert Boyle, called the father of chemistry, was a devout member of Anglican, who said that he liked to do his scientific experiments on Sunday because they're a form of worship. And the greatest of them, Isaac Newton, the towering figure of the scientific revolution, spent as much time in studying scripture and theology as he did mathematics and physics. Most scientists every single one of these 21 names I gave you were devout Christians, about half of them Catholic, about half of them Protestant. I cannot find any great scientist from this period who was an atheist. Most scientists were religious believers until well into the 1800s. For example, the two greatest physicists of the 1800s were Michael Faraday and James Clerk Maxwell. Einstein's scientific heroes were Isaac Newton, Faraday, and Maxwell. He had pictures of them on his wall. Faraday and Maxwell were the ones who were mainly responsible for developing the correct theory of electricity and magnetism, among their other great scientific achievements, and they were both deeply devout Protestants. So, for most of scientific history, indeed up to practically the very time that Draper and White wrote their books, claiming a war, most scientists were quite religious. What about the Catholic Church? Well, I'm going to tell you something that, first of all, we could talk about Galileo, but I would need another hour. The Galileo case was really kind of the exception that proved the rule. It was the only dark spot in the Catholic Church's otherwise glorious 800-year period where it was interacting with science. And one fact that dramatically illustrates the Church's benevolent attitude towards science and its enormous contributions to science was the large number of Catholic priests who made major scientific discoveries, including founding whole branches of science. So I'm not going to tell you all of them. There's about 20 priests who made these important contributions to science that I can talk about, but I'm only going to tell you about a handful. So every Catholic should know the names of these three great priests and scientists. At the top right is Gregor Mendel, who most of you have probably heard of, an Augustinian priest, like the current Pope, an Augustinian priest who is the founder of genetics. At the top left is Georges Lemaitre. I don't expect you to pronounce the name. Nobody knows how to do it right. A French friend of mine taught me how to pronounce it roughly right. He is the guy standing with Einstein. He was a Belgian theoretical physicist and mathematician and Catholic priest named Georges Lemaitre. He was the founder of the Big Bang Theory. He was the first to understand, he was the first, along with someone else named Friedman, independently, who understood that the universe is expanding, and it was Lemaitre who proposed it was expanding from what we now call the Big Bang. He called it the primeval, what do you call it? I don't know the term for it. But he is considered to be the founder of the Big Bang Theory. And in the middle is a scientist, a Danish scientist, named Nicholas Steno, who is really the founder of geology. A recent writer, whose name I have forgotten off the top of my head, wrote a history of geology and says it is Steno who is the one who is responsible for the modern concepts of geology, really one of the principal founder of the science of geology. He was a Danish by birth. He was raised Lutheran. He converted to Catholicism. He eventually became a priest and eventually was made a bishop. And in 1982, was it? Or 83, he was beatified by Pope St. John Paul II. And the founder of geology was a Catholic priest and convert. Every Catholic should know about Mendel, Lemaitre, and Steno. Three other priests who founded branches of science. You don't have to remember these. But Father Angelo Secchi, an Italian Jesuit priest of the early 19th century, was one of the founders of astrophysics. Astrophysics is the study of, astronomy tells you where things are in the sky. But astrophysics studies what are they, what are they made of, how do they form, how do they burn, and so on, how do they use their energy, the physics of what's going on in the universe. And that the principal tool for understanding those things is studying the spectra of the light that comes to us from stars and the sun. And the pioneer in studying the spectra of the light of the sun and stars was Secchi. And he is in fact the one who first systematically classified the stars from their spectra. And his system of classification was superseded by one developed at Harvard who built upon his. But the modern way of classifying stars can be traced to the work of Angelo Secchi. In the middle is a French scientist named Merlin Mersenne, a priest of the Mennonite order. He and Galileo are considered the founders of the science of acoustics, which is the study of sound. Mersenne was the first to measure the speed of sound. He did a number of other very important things in acoustics and the study of waves. Mersenne was a major figure in the scientific world of his time. The historian Peter L. Bernstein called Mersenne, quote, the center of the world of science and mathematics in the first half of the 1600s. And the Dictionary of Scientific Biography calls him, quote, one of the architects of the European scientific community. And finally, on the right is a picture of a French priest who is considered the founder of crystallography, the study of crystals. And his name is René Juste-Owy. Now, I could go on, but I'm running out of time. So I've shown you some important scientists who are Catholic priests to underline how much the church, as an institution, valued scientific research. You wouldn't have all these clergymen doing it if it was not valued by the church. And I could have shown you far more. I could also have shown you a much, much larger number of great scientists who are Catholic lay people. On our website, the Society of Catholic Scientists, is actually a curated set of biographies of about 100 important Catholic scientists of the past. These are people whose names live on. Things are named after them. They're in the textbooks. They left an indelible mark on scientific history. And all of them, the 100 biographies, are people carefully curated. They're all people we know who have been practicing and believing Catholics, at least at the time they died. But, so I go to the website for that. Now, I'm going to just show you instead of going, here are some of the great Catholic scientists of the 20th century. Most of them are Nobel Prize winners. and I don't have time to go through them one by one, but I do want to talk about the last one on the list, on Martin Maldacena. I actually saw him at a conference in Princeton just within the last 2 weeks. It was at lunch, and I actually, let me tell you about it. If people are still doing physics in 500 years, they will know who Maldacena is, because he made a major, fundamental breakthrough in fundamental physics, showing the relationship between quantum field theory and gravity. Now, one way to measure the importance of a scientific research paper and its impact is by how many times it's cited by other scientific research papers. And so I went to a database, and these are the 5 most highly cited papers in the history of fundamental physics in the last 60 years. So, down number 5 is the great paper, there were many great papers, but his most famous paper is number 5 on this list, with about 12,000 citations. It's a paper dealing with what's called Hawking radiation from black holes. Number 2 on the list is Stephen Weinberg's great paper that was really laid the foundations of our current understanding of particle physics. And that paper has about 15,000 citations. Ed Witten, I'll mention him a couple of times later. He has many great papers, as does Weinberg. Ed Witten's most cited paper is, it has 13,000. Now he's regarded Witten as probably, most physicists, they've actually done opinion surveys, most physicists regard him as the most brilliant physicist in the world. At the top is Juan Maldacena. His paper has 20,000 citations. It's the most highly cited paper in the history of fundamental physics. And he is a practicing believing Catholic and a member of the Society of Catholic Scientists. Okay, so I'm not going to say any more about scientists. I'm now going to talk about science. And I think I started, do I have 5 more minutes? I think I get through my last presentation in 5 minutes. Is that right? Okay. So, remember, atheists have tended to say that scientific discoveries actually undermine religion. If you were alive in the year 1900, it might have looked a lot like that. Okay? Many people, it looked like that. But in the 20th century, there were many plot twists. Science had seemed to be going in one direction, and then it sort of went in the opposite direction. And I'm just going to go through one slide for each of these 5 plot twists. The first one is that the older science, pre-20th century, the older science strongly suggested that the universe had no beginning. The idea that the universe had a beginning started to be dismissed by some people as mythological and superstitious. But lo and behold, along came Einstein, who proposed his theory of gravity in 1915, and based on this theory, Georges Brunet, Father Brunet, proposed what is now called the Big Bang Theory. In the 1960s, very strong evidence started to accumulate that there was a Big Bang about 14 billion years ago, and that the universe was probably began at that point. The older science, number 2, the older science, starting with Isaac Newton, had strongly suggested that the laws of physics determine the future uniquely, leaving no scope for free will. In other words, it seemed that the equations of physics are so strong that, and predictive, that given the state of the universe at one time, everything that happens after that can only happen in one way. And that made many people lose their faith. This was a huge blow to religion. However, in the 20th century, it was discovered that this is not true. Quantum mechanics was discovered, and it showed that the laws of physics do not uniquely determine the future. The laws of physics only tell you the probabilities of things happening in the future, not definitely what will happen. The third plot twist: the older science seemed to say that human beings are just an accident in a universe that was clearly not made with us in mind. But in the last several decades, physicists have begun to realize that many features of the universe and its laws are just right to make it possible for the universe to have living things in it, such as ourselves. Now, this was once very controversial, even say 20 years ago, very controversial, and many scientists rejected it. However, it's now generally accepted to be the case. And I'll just quote two famous scientists who are not religious, who actually support this idea. So Stephen Hawking, famously an atheist, said, "Our universe and its laws appear to have a design that is tailor-made to support us, and if we are to exist, leaves little room for alteration. That is not easily explained and raises the natural question of why it is that way." Ed Whitman, who I mentioned just a minute ago in an interview, said, "The fact that galaxies, stars, and planets roughly like ours could have formed, and that living things roughly like us could have formed, depends on many details of the laws of physics as we currently know them, being just the way they are and not being slightly different." I think will never resolve the sense of wonder about that, and he is not religious. The fourth plot twist: the older science have revealed a universe so vast that it seemed to point to the insignificance of Earth and of us. But we now know that it takes billions of years of cosmic evolution, of astrophysical processes, first to produce the elements of the periodic table. It took billions of years to produce all those elements. And then it took billions of years of biological evolution to produce complex organisms themselves. So you need the universe, if we're to be here, to last for billions of years. And Einstein's theory of gravity relates the size of the universe to how long it lasts. So, if you want the universe to last billions of years, as needed to produce creatures like us, it has to be as vast as our universe is, billions of light years across. So it's not a sign of our insignificance. The size of the universe is a precondition for our being here. And finally, the older physics seem only to have a place for matter in it. And because of time, I'm just going to make an assertion. Quantum mechanics, according to some very smart people, great scientists, implies that there's something about observers, that, namely their minds, that cannot be explained by physics. There's something more to observers like ourselves, such as ourselves, than physics, than matter is. And this is a controversial point, very controversial. Most physicists reject it, I think, because they're materialists. But there's strong arguments for it that have never been really answered. So neither of these people, by the way, was religious. Sir Rudolf Peierls, a great 20th century physicist, said, based on quantum mechanics, he said, "The premise that you can describe in terms of physics the whole function of a human being, including its knowledge and its consciousness, is untenable. There's still something missing." And Eugene Wigner, a Nobel Prize-winning physicist, he said, and he's basing this on quantum mechanics, "It will remain remarkable in whatever way our future concepts develop, that the very study of the external world, that is the physical world, led to the conclusion that the content of consciousness is an ultimate reality. Mind is as fundamental as matter and not reducible to matter." And now the final thing I'll say is not a twist in the plot, but something that has become increasingly clear over the last 2 centuries, especially the 20th century. Namely, that in order to formulate the laws of physics, you need very profound mathematical concepts. And that is suggested to many physicists, even those who are not religious, that a mind is behind the world that we see. And I could quote a number of great scientists who say this, but I'm going to quote Ed Whitman again, who describes himself as a skeptical agnostic. He was asked by an interviewer very recently, one who knew he was a skeptical agnostic, why such profound mathematics was needed to formulate the laws of physics. And Whitman said, "It is as though the world had been created by a mathematician." And there are many other people who have said similar things. So there I will end. The Catholic Church and her members have a great and glorious history of contributing to science, and many of the latest discoveries of science have revealed a world that fits much better